presented by Evelyn Peng and by Paul Austin. Both the presenters have been part and parcel of the discussants, the moderators, the participants, so they will also give you a view and feedback from the areas that they were presenting, and also in regards to the same theme that is related. The other presentation is from GIZ. This is the BMM, rather the program, in the Better Migration Management Program. This is a study that was on In Search of Sustainable Opportunities, mapping of economic initiatives for migrants, returnees, and victims of trafficking in Ethiopia. This will be presented by Ms. Mohabai Chodhure. Please again, apologies for my pronunciation. I also want to introduce the panelists. The panelists are here just to give us a bit of can I say a bit of a push in terms of some of the conversations that we need to have from the floor. We have here from UNHCR, Madam Josephine, and she's an expert in the area of refugee protection. We also have, next is Mrs. Asin and Ashin. Yes, and from the Ethiopia Human Rights Commission. And then we have Madam Tion from the IOM. And finally, we have Yulia from GIZ, who works with us, very closely with us in the migration program that we have at IGAD at the Secretariat. So I would like to introduce the first presenter, or rather request the first presenter. We'll present from our seats just to manage the time. If the IT team could project the presentation of the first presentation for Ms. Mububa, please. Who is there? Kindly project. And let me welcome Ms. Mububa to introduce herself real quick and also have 15 minutes of your presentation to the conference team. Thank you. Please welcome.
Thank you very much, Rachel, and good afternoon to everyone. I want to start by thanking the hosts for inviting the Better Migration Management Program to share with you some of the findings of our report, which is entitled In Search of Sustainable Opportunities, Mapping of Economic Initiatives for Migrants, Returnees and Victims of Trafficking in Ethiopia. It was done together with our colleagues at Walaita Sodo University, Dr. Tagese, Nicholas Mayer, who is also here, and Tadele, so just to also acknowledge their contribution to this particular study. Next slide, please. So it's no secret for the participants in this particular room that one of the major reasons for migration is because of economic opportunities. And given that the title of this particular conference is related to inclusion and social cohesion, the necessity of economic inclusion is really high in the sphere of migration. I wanted to start by telling you about the objectives of this particular study. I won't go through the migration landscape of Ethiopia. I think those of us who were in the previous breakout session with Dr. Garmachu had a really good overview of what that particular context is. But in Ethiopia, there are approximately 2 million people every year entering the labor market, and that puts a huge strain on the economic system in Ethiopia. And the background to this particular study was the fact that it's really important, whilst trying to address some of the protection needs of the migrants that are moving abroad, there's also a real need to ensure that there are opportunities in country, so that there is a choice about migration and not necessarily a requirement that people ought to migrate to find better opportunities. So this particular study set out to do a few major things. The first being that it we tried to map the different stakeholders, both government organizations and CSOs, that are engaged in the provision of economic support to returnees, migrants, and victims of trafficking. We tried to identify some of the challenges that there are in creating long-term opportunities. And in the last few days, we've had quite a lot of discussions about what self-reliance means, what long-term opportunities means, and so as a result, this particular aspect comes through quite strongly in the study. We also wanted to collect the voices of migrants, returnees, and victims of trafficking themselves, to look at which particular initiatives they've partaken in, and how they perceive the effectiveness of those particular initiatives as well. We wanted to highlight the good practices that have occurred in some of the economic initiatives that have taken place throughout Ethiopia, and highlight the gaps, some of the duplicated efforts that exist in the economic initiatives too. And then finally to say, as with all research, I'm sure, and the ones that we've discussed throughout the past couple of days, the purpose primarily of this research is to inform policy and programming priority aspects of providing recommendations to ensure that this actually has some practical impact down the road. Next slide, please. So in terms of the scope of this particular study, it was limited in its geographical scope to Addis and SNNPR, Sidama and Southwest regions. Our target group was migrants, returnees and victims of trafficking. We excluded refugees and internally displaced persons from this particular study. We looked at beneficiaries that were of working age, so minors were not included. And in terms of economic initiatives, we adopted quite a broad view of what that concept was, so that it was wide-ranging, including income-generating activities, vocational skills and training, adult education, job search assistance within Ethiopia. We're also aware that there are, of course, organizations that support individuals looking for opportunities outside of Ethiopia, but again, that was not within the scope of our study. Next slide, please, Lucas. Thank you. In terms of our methodology, we obtained both qualitative and quantitative data from both regions that we looked at, and that was through questionnaires, through focus group discussions, through bilateral meetings as well. And in the different areas, we spoke to beneficiaries, we spoke to CSOs, we spoke to government counterparts. So just by way of example, I don't want to spend too long on the methodology, but we did speak to the Ministry of Labour and Skills, the Refugee Returnees Service, the Ministry of Justice, the EDRMC, as well as the Employers Federation of Ethiopia. Next slide, please. And at the outset, I just want to clarify some of the strengths and limitations of the study. I mean, I think often when we start out, and I speak for BMM, we had quite, in terms of geographical scope, and hope to cover the whole country. In fact, that was not possible due to some of the security situations that was arising in Ethiopia at the time. So as a result, our geographical scope is quite limited, and we had hoped, for example, to include the Amhara region, where there is quite a large concentration of migrants and returnees, but in the end, we were not able to. Not all of our stakeholders that we contacted actually responded. That includes, for example, private sector counterparts. I should also say that our sample size is small, so it's not expected that this study is representative of the whole of Ethiopia. It's just indicative. In terms of the strengths of the study, I want to draw on the fact that as well as this particular study, we have an accompanying booklet, which is a resource booklet produced in Amharic, which provides a list of the economic initiatives available in Addis and in the southern region of Ethiopia. And that is a direct resource for the beneficiaries, so that wherever and whenever they find themselves in a position where they want to undertake economic opportunities, that they're able to actually directly contact the relevant organizations that are providing them. And as I mentioned earlier, the voices are really important. I think that's one of the main strengths of this particular study. And as I go on, we'll talk about some of the quotes coming from the focus group discussions. Next slide, please. So moving on to the key findings. The first is in respect to referral mechanisms and coordination. As many of you will be aware, the government is tasked to support and provide economic opportunities and support in creating job opportunities. And particularly in Ethiopia, there is quite considerable advancement in terms of legislation in this particular area. And so there is the Migration Victims National Referral System Directive, which came into force last year. However, in terms of practical application of it, it is still quite limited, and the operationalization of it still has much to be said for that. Similarly, there are MOUs in the regions, for example, in the Amhara region and in the SNNPR region, in respect to referral of victims of trafficking and vulnerable migrants to particular services. But again, many of these referral processes rely on informal connections and not necessarily in a formalized way. Secondly, in respect to coordination, this was one of our main findings, and I think something that was also reiterated in the previous sessions that we've had, that the general coordination to manage reintegration activities, particularly at the lower levels, zonal and border levels, is relatively weak and under-resourced, according to the officials that we spoke to in the SNNPR region. This was attributed to the fact that work-related to migration or reintegration was conceived as being seasonal. There's often high turnover of personnel, particularly capacity to deal with the numbers that are coming in. Next slide, please. In respect to our findings regarding connections with the private sector, we had a number of questionnaire respondents that positively mentioned that they did connections to the private sector, and among connections that were listed were, for example, Ethiopian Airlines, plastics factories, private hotel stores, amongst many others. And in all these cases, the reason that these organizations had these linkages, and perhaps an obvious point, but quite a fundamental one, is that it was necessary to facilitate employment opportunities as a result of these linkages. However, there was also a majority education and skills and training institutions and the private sector. So in respect to our focus group discussions with implementers of economic initiatives, we found that they expressed a number of challenges that they faced in trying to provide these initiatives. The first being shortage of funding. Economic initiatives are costly. They take a considerable there's also from the government side to provide psychosocial support and economic support. It's difficult to balance for migrants only because there are also many others who seek just on returnees, victims of trafficking, and migrants. But outside of those categories are others in Ethiopia who are also in the job market seeking employment, and so the pressures are quite immense. Secondly, another challenge that was mentioned was insufficient time for economic reintegration programs. And here again, the quote below says, time constraints are a big problem. Initially, the project was supposed to support them psychologically. The project periods are too short. And I think there needs to be a real understanding that not every individual is ready for an economic opportunity at a particular time. Often people may be facing either psychosocial issues, medical and health issues, and as a result, next slide please. And then on the same issue, from again the challenges of the implementers, there's a real barrier to accessing finance, particularly for this group of beneficiaries. And you'll see again in the quote that it says the process to get a loan is too lengthy, and above all, the interest from microfinance institutions is too high. And given that in our study, the majority of those that we spoke to wanted to have self-employment, not necessarily wage employment. And as a result, this proved to be quite a big barrier. The next one was that the returnees were often too picky and demanding, and had greater expectations than others perhaps in the Ethiopian employment market. And generally, and this was quite a common challenge that implementers mentioned, was the lack of information, organized data on returnees as well. Next slide, please.
5 minutes, 5 minutes.
Thank you.
to improve research work that is coming from the region, from our national levels, and also at a regional or even international level. So please, I'd like to welcome, we do have two presenters, that is Paul and Evelyn. I think you might want to present together, but it would be interesting, but please welcome and introduce yourselves, and we have about 15 to 20 minutes for your presentation. Thank you. Please.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure and an honor to be with you here today to present the outcomes of this fascinating research project looking at migration and health at the continental, regional, and also member state levels. My name is Paul Asquith. I was team leader for the research project at the Center for Rural Development at the University of Humboldt in Berlin, and I'm currently director of research at Shabaka. My good colleague and boss, Dr. Bashayat, she gave the opening speech. And Evelyn, maybe you'd like to introduce yourself too.
Sure. Merci beaucoup. Bon après-midi. Merci Paul. Je suis Evelyne Kempe de la Commission de l'Union africaine et en collaboration avec mon collègue Paul, nous allons donc présenter les éléments clés en lien avec cette étude qui a été initiée en 2020 au niveau de la Commission. Pendant que la présentation PowerPoint est positionnée, permettez-moi de transmettre les salutations chaleureuses de son Excellence ambassadeur Minata Sessouma, commissaire à la santé, aux affaires humanitaires et au développement social à l'Union africaine, ainsi que de M. Sabelo Bokazi, chef de la division Travail, Emploi et Migration. Si nos collègues de la technique veulent bien afficher la présentation. Peut-être, en attendant que le slide soit positionné, merci infiniment, c'est important de préciser le contexte institutionnel dans lequel cette étude a été initiée. Next slide. Alors, comme vous le savez, la Commission de l'Union africaine est une institution intergouvernementale de niveau continental, regroupant 55 États membres, et pour laquelle les questions de migration et de santé revêtent une importance stratégique. Nous le voyons notamment à travers le cadre de politique migratoire, qui est dans une certaine mesure notre document d'orientation. On aime à l'appeler notre Bible au niveau de la Commission, en ce qui concerne la gouvernance migratoire au niveau continental, et dans lequel le lien stratégique entre migration et santé est mis en avant et même reconnu comme un élément clé de gouvernance migratoire sur le continent. Et donc, dans ce contexte, il était important pour la Commission, afin de pouvoir conseiller et orienter non seulement les États membres, mais également les communautés économiques régionales sur ces questions-là, d'avoir une meilleure compréhension de l'état des lieux en ce qui concerne les politiques de migration et santé, en ce qui concerne la cohérence entre ces deux secteurs, mais également en ce qui concerne les besoins des migrants et des réfugiés pour les questions de santé. D'où donc l'intérêt de ce projet de recherche. Alors, le prochain slide met en avant justement l'approche collaborative qui a été pensée, voulue dès le départ pour ce projet de recherche, qui a été initié, prochain slide, par la Commission de l'Union africaine, notamment, comme je l'ai dit, le département des affaires sociales à l'époque. Entre-temps, le nom a évolué, mais spécifiquement la division Travail, Emploi et Migration. Et nous avons donc sollicité l'appui du bureau GIZ de liaison avec l'Union africaine, avec un certain nombre de collaborateurs qui nous ont apporté non seulement un appui technique, mais également des orientations et un soutien en termes de ressources pour mener cette étude-là. La collaboration a également permis d'identifier un institut de recherche, prochain slide, le Centre pour le développement rural de l'Université de Humboldt à Berlin, avec un ensemble de chercheurs basés à la fois à Berlin et à Oxford, mais également qui ont associé une équipe de chercheurs africains, notamment dans les pays où une collecte de données très spécifique a été faite, le Kenya, l'Afrique du Sud et le Nigeria. Paul en parlera en détail tout à l'heure. Une troisième équipe a été associée à ce projet, prochain slide, notamment l'équipe qui s'est focalisée sur l'élaboration des modules de formation. Alors, en ce qui concerne la méthodologie et les résultats principaux de l'étude, je vais donner la parole à Paul pour nous entretenir sur cette question-là. Merci.
Merci Evelyne, et je vais présenter en anglais parce que je ne veux pas assassiner la langue de Molière cet après-midi. Okay, next slide please. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the methodology we used for the project. We adopted a mixed methodology approach. If we could go back one slide, please. Oh, no, forward one. I notice we keep missing slides. Nope, forward please, one. Forward please, one, not backwards. We're going backwards, unfortunately. Okay. So thank you. So just to give you an overview of the research project and the methodology deployed, it was a research project that lasted 1 year, and we deployed a mixed methodology approach, which included a detailed literature and policy review. You can see on the screen that we reviewed over 500 academic publications in detail. I think it's important to note as well, we originally considered 10,024 scientific publications, but we used various software to narrow it down to something more manageable for the research team. We also assessed 575 policy documents at the continental, regional, and national levels. And we also conducted secondary data collection in Morocco, DR Congo, Kenya, Nigeria, and South Africa. And I think it's important to note too that this research project was conducted during the COVID pandemic. So it was a period of a lot of challenges that had to be overcome. Travel was not possible. There were multiple lockdowns. And it was very challenging for our partner researchers in the three countries for primary data collection to collect data from the three groups concerned. So when it came to, next slide please. Primary data collection, we collected data from regular migrants in Nigeria, refugees in Kenya, and irregular migrants in South Africa via surveys, interviews, and focus groups. And as you can see on the screen, we collected in total 965 eligible surveys across the three countries. I think it's important to note there are certain data limitations with the study. Certainly it's fair to note that data collection was limited to urban centres here in Nairobi, and a massive thank you to our Kenyan partners at the Technical University of Kenya, and in particular IOM in Nairobi, who facilitated access to a clinic in Nairobi that works with migrants as well as other communities. And as you can see, we then conducted thematic and statistical analysis to inform recommendations for policymakers and practitioners. Now, I'm not going to talk about the results of the study. There's a very detailed report of 160 pages, which you can consult online or in hard copy. But I'm now going to talk a little bit about the key recommendations that arose out of the study. Next slide, please. Thank you. Next slide, please. And also I want to mention some of the cross-cutting issues that arose. We know that migration and health is a cross-cutting issue in itself. Next slide, please. So the first cross-cutting issue that arose was around the lack of policy coherence and joint action across member states. And I think it's an important point to note that diseases do not stop at borders, and this was particularly relevant during the global COVID pandemic. Documentation poses a challenge for some migrants, particularly those who are irregular, and it can be very difficult to obtain legal status, which limits their access to healthcare. And I think that also is very relevant for the topic of this conference, which is around social inclusion for migrants within the IGAD region. Another key cross-cutting issue identified was discussions about social coverage and the need to move to what is called a social floors approach, so enabling a certain minimum level of coverage, basic access to services such as health, education, etc., for refugees and migrants. Next slide, please. Thank you. Another cross-cutting issue that was identified was the need for equity of access to healthcare. And it was interesting for us, again, this term social flaws was raised by 9 out of 10 of the various experts, policy experts from the continent that we interviewed. Another key area of finding was around gender and migration, and I think it's important to note that women have particular risks and vulnerabilities in terms of their migration journeys and experience, and therefore that there's a need to mitigate and respond to these and provide services that are appropriate. Next slide, please. There are a number of policy recommendations that came out of the study, and I'm only going to give the headlines or the top lines of some of the main ones. We've mentioned policy coherence already, and I think everyone here in this room will agree there's a need for greater policy coherence between migration, health, and other policy areas at the regional and member state levels. Similarly, there's a need that was identified for specific guidance for regional and member states on good practice in migration and health, building on the 2018 MFPA of the African Union, MPFA, sorry. Next slide, please. Another key area of recommendation that I think will resonate very deeply with members at the conference is the need for improved data collection on migrants' health. And one recommendation was for the African Union and for RECs such as IGAD to develop specialized guidance for member states on a systematic approach and common indicators for collecting data on migrants and on their health. Next slide, please. Another recommendation was about the importance of improving social coverage for regular migrants. And the recommendation was that all member states should develop health policies that move beyond basic social coverage to provide minimum social floors to the population as a whole for all different types of migrants, whether they're regular, irregular, people in refugee-like situations. This has improved health outcomes not only for these different migrant subgroups, but also for the wider communities in which they settle. Next slide, please. Also important is the need to consider the needs of vulnerable migrant groups, and in particular, and I mentioned this earlier, the need to recognize the gendered dimensions of migration and to develop policies, programs, and services that respond to those specific needs. Next slide, please. So for this section, I'm now going to hand back to Evelyn, who's going to talk about how the African Union, its partners, RECs and member states have been working to implement the outcomes and the recommendations from the study. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Paul. Et comme on voulait s'assurer que vous vous souveniez de nous, on a décidé de changer du français vers l'anglais à chaque fois, à chaque 5 minutes. Alors, sur la base donc des recommandations de l'étude et surtout des conclusions, il est important de mentionner que l'Union africaine s'est intéressée à la mise en œuvre de différents produits à différents niveaux. Prochain slide. Et donc, juste pour donner un aperçu, en plus du rapport d'étude, comme Paul l'a dit, 160-170 pages après traitement, qui présente vraiment cette analyse des différentes politiques, de leur mise en œuvre, mais également des besoins en santé des migrants et des réfugiés. Nous avons également une note d'orientation politique qui propose aux États membres et au CER une approche en 4 dimensions pour aborder la question d'accès à la santé pour les migrants et réfugiés et qui insiste notamment sur le volet données et statistiques, sur la cohérence au niveau des politiques et sur d'autres éléments, notamment la coopération interétatique et interrégionale. Nous avons également un autre produit qui est un article scientifique qui analyse la relation entre le statut documentaire, le statut professionnel et l'accès aux services de santé et qui justement relève le besoin d'analyse supplémentaire sur cette question-là, notamment l'impact de la question genre. Le 4e produit important de ce projet de recherche est notamment le programme de formation qui a été développé. Et, prochain slide, c'est un programme notamment qui permet d'adresser la question de renforcement des capacités, qui est un des piliers à travers lequel l'Union africaine entend avancer avec les conclusions de cette recherche-là. Renforcement des capacités pour les décideurs politiques, mais également un renforcement des capacités qui devrait être complémentaire avec les offres de formation pour différents acteurs, les professionnels de la santé, les personnes en charge, comme ma collègue l'a mentionné, de l'accueil, de l'appui à la réintégration, par exemple, des migrants de retour, etc. Un autre pilier sur lequel la Commission voudrait notamment insister est la sensibilisation sur les résultats de la recherche, mais également la mise en cohérence des politiques à travers des lignes directrices, mais surtout encourager les différents acteurs, notamment Africa CDC, les CER, à travailler de façon pratique pour améliorer les bénéfices sanitaires de la santé pour les migrants. Comme je l'ai dit, la question du renforcement des capacités, prochain slide, reste très importante pour nous et notamment la formation qui a été conçue sur 10 modules notamment, permettra d'aborder un certain nombre de thèmes tels que la couverture santé universelle, l'implication du secteur privé en ce qui concerne l'accès à la santé pour les migrants, mais également le dilemme qui existe souvent entre les États membres, qui est de décider entre gérer les urgences ou alors avoir des interventions structurelles à long terme. Prochain slide. Un des éléments clés, prochain slide, un des éléments clés justement qui est important pour nous, prochain slide, c'est l'importance pour les acteurs au niveau continental, mais également au niveau régional, de pouvoir faire le lien entre le renforcement des capacités, la recherche, mais également des politiques pertinentes. Prochain slide, s'il vous plaît. Et nous reconnaissons et apprécions véritablement les efforts qui sont menés déjà par l'IGAD pour adresser la question des données à travers le renforcement des capacités. Et bien entendu, la Commission de l'Union africaine reste disponible à soutenir ces efforts. Mais nous pensons également, comme cela a été réitéré par de nombreux acteurs ici, que la question de la cohérence au niveau politique reste stratégique, mais également le besoin continu de recherche. Nous espérons que dans les prochaines années, nous aurons davantage un cercle vertueux, je dirais, entre les chercheurs et les décideurs politiques, qui nous aideront non seulement à mieux comprendre les besoins des populations cibles, pour élaborer nos politiques, mais également à pouvoir documenter les résultats et les impacts du travail qui est mené par les organisations continentales et régionales. Je vous remercie pour votre attention.
Thank you so much. That was an excellent presentation from both the teams. As you can see, there's a teamwork there, and also there's a representation there. Definitely would want to hear more. I think this would take an entire day in terms of its own session, and we really appreciate the excellent summarizing that Mabuba has managed to take us through in the first presentation, as well as Paul and Evelyn in the second presentation. But we don't want to go away without allowing the discussants to ask, or rather just to steer us a little bit in a few questions or give us a few insights or observations. What you realize from this presentation is that they're quite unique in its approach. We want to know not more, we appreciate that we're able to be given an overview of the objective, the methodology, the findings, the recommendations, the way forward. On the other hand, we also notice that there are policy recommendations of findings that are actually being implemented at the regional, at the national level. So in this discussion, we'd like to, because in the earlier discussions, we're actually more or less discussing about the methodologies and so on, more of a peer review. But this has gone through the peer review, and what we want to have is more on giving us some takeaways. What are the opportunities for researchers who are here? in terms of collaboration, in terms of partnership, in terms of even being able now to extend to the point that we have capacity building programs, we have policy briefs that are coming through the research work that we are doing. We also want to understand what are these good practices that we are talking about. My understanding of a good practice might be different from my colleague, but we want to have that discussion. The other is, what is the learning takeaway? Because this is a learning platform. There are different stakeholders, there are different expert areas here, there are different themes and the thematic issues we're discussing. But what is the learning takeaway? So I will allow each discussant at least 3 minutes, challenge the presenters. This time is more of challenging them because they are at more of an advanced level. Ask these questions, and we'll start from Madam Josephine. A few minutes, 3 minutes, please pick your punch points very carefully, because we want to challenge them now. Because they challenged the other researchers who presented, so we also want to challenge them to where they are right now. And maybe 3 minutes would be good. Let me ask permission from the president of the session of the day. 3 minutes. Okay, so you have 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. Both presenters really gave a very important overview of how us, the stakeholders, are to address issues related to the well-being of the persons we all serve. I will look at an aspect of linkages, something that we need to have as a take-home. The facilitation of opportunities, we need to also ensure that appropriate linkages are done. So take notes from your presentation to ensure that this is done, and it's for all of us in our work. The barriers to access. These barriers, having been identified, require strategies, appropriate strategies to ensure that we have sustainable solutions. Data is important. Data collection informs programming and policy. So for all the work we do, that needs to be done in an adequate manner. And from your presentation, there is less data in terms of statistics. You have more of qualitative than quantitative. So please take note of that and see how you can address that in future. The capacities within the population, the target population, needs to be properly identified, because there are diverse needs and capacities. And if those are identified adequately, then the solutions will be linked to that. So I actually did not see how that came out in terms of looking at its impact, but I am sure that you will take note of it. Community engagement. Remember, you were talking about having, involving our communities. Communities should be meaningfully engaged. It is not about just ticking the box. If you don't want to have a white elephant project or research, make sure that you meaningfully engage them, consult, and identify the needs. These are crucial for effective programming. On the recommendations, the legislation you mentioned, we have to look at functionality of legislations, and someone mentioned, the guidelines to ensure that these policies are operationalized is also very important. You want me to move to the second presenter? Or?
Yeah, maybe we move to the second presenter. I'm sure there could be some similarity on the questions.
Yes.
And then we'll allow also for the presenters to respond, because we are taking two different presentations at the same time.
Okay.
So you want to have one more, or do we go to Madam Ashin?
I thought I would just
Okay,
go
maybe
across.
one more question for them, and then we go to the next discussant. Just one more.
Okay.
Okay.
The location is different, as you mentioned. I love that differentiation of national and regional. And then the findings of cross-cutting issues. Cross-cutting issues are really going through in terms of health, and health in migration is really, really crucial. But when you are doing the cross-cutting issues, did you think about the mental health and psychosocial support for diverse groups? This is one thing you have to look into. And lastly, let me say that
All right, one last,
yes,
okay.
Partnership and collaboration is important to deliver our objectives and priorities. So we look forward to not only reviewing and finalizing research work, but to also see how these successful stories can be operationalized and translated into conducive policies that will inform action for a collaborative responsibility.
Thank you, Madam Josephine. I think we appreciate those comments, that feedback, but we would like to collect all that feedback and then allow the presenters to make their submissions or their response. So, Madam Ashin, please 3 minutes so that we can also allow the presenters to respond.
I will try my best to stick to the 3 minutes. Thank you so much. So I am going to give my reflection on the first presenter. Habuba, thank you so much for eloquent presentation and for bringing this to our attention, especially in the context of Ethiopia. Ethiopia is a source, destination, and origin for migrants, and currently hosting the biggest migrant returnees. So it's very important to discuss about economic integration. One thing I really want to stress is about the coordination mechanism that you mentioned, which is very important. Because in Ethiopian context, I know my colleagues here from Ethiopia NPC would definitely agree with me. The coordination mechanism is something we really need to sort out, because there is a huge issue when it comes to the responsible organ that deals with migrant returnees and their reintegration to the society. But just to challenge Mahabuba, your research or your study focused on migrant returnees and victims of trafficking. My impression is you just approached it as a homogeneous group, because in my opinion and understanding, the experience of all these migrant returnees are not similar. For example, in the case of victim of trafficking, those who were returnees but a victim of trafficking, their needs, vulnerabilities, and experience is quite different. But you just said perspective of this group. So I had the impression that you considered in your study as a homogeneous group. So my question is, to what extent your study looked into the various experience of this group? For example, the challenge of victim of trafficking would definitely be different from any other returnees. For one and stronger reason, most of the victim of trafficking might be undocumented migrants. So how that affects their economic integration? For example, you just said economic integration, you mean by economic integration, you also touched upon access to education and TOT, so I mean vocational training. So how being a victim of trafficking and returnee affect and influence that? And or are you come to conclusion that they face similar challenge and experience? So that's something I really want to hear from you. And the other one is the last, the geographical scope. In the study, you focused on Addis Ababa, SNNP, Sidama, and Southwest Ethiopia. For me, when it comes to some of the issues, for example, the private actor, most of them are, I am sure they are based in Addis. So, but the conclusion seems that that there are like similar experience across the board. So could you please elaborate on that? Last but not least.
Thank you, Madam Ashin. I think
Thank
let's allow the,
all right.
the presenters to take those very, very interesting reflections. But before we go to the next panelist, I think these are some heavy responses, but let's respond in a way that will allow the two groups of presenters to take different questions. So I would propose that the questions by Madam Josephine regarding sustainable solutions, qualitative data or information that is there, targeted population, community engagement, if that can be responded by Evelyn and Paul. And then I feel that Madam Ashine, your questions were more directed to Mabuba, so she will respond to those reflections that you have. I hope you were able to capture most of them. Nonetheless, I think when the two other discussants come in, we will also incorporate having some reflections on the same. So I would just allow first, let's have, I think, let's start with Paul. Kindly respond, please take 3 minutes, because we still have some interesting questions coming from both Sion and Julia, who prepared heavily for this particular session. So please, just 3 minutes. I know the questions are quite, not heavy, but require a little bit more response time, but just try and summarize. Maybe one person can respond, and next it can be the rest.
Thank you, Madam Chair,
Okay,
and thank you for our discussants for your excellent point raised. I just wanted to pick up on 2 points that you made, Madam Josefina. One was around the need to consider mental health needs of migrants and refugees. We did in the study, and it's my fault. I included a slide on mental health, which I removed for reasons of brevity and time. But you're absolutely right. There are very real needs to provide appropriate psychosocial support to different groups of migrants and refugees, depending on their migration journeys, depending on the type of migration they've had. Victims of trafficking, as people have said, may have very different needs from those who've been displaced by recurrent conflict, for example. And I just wanted to pick up on another point that Madam Josefina made about the human capacities and identifying human capacities. And I would argue that it's very important to identify the human capacities of migrants and refugees, and to make services, policies and programs as migrant-centered as possible. As my boss and colleague said in the opening keynote speech, migrants and diaspora are more than beneficiaries and cash machines. They are active agents of their own destiny, if you like, and given the chance, they can contribute to the countries in which they are passing through or settling. Thank you.
I think now we can have the response from Mabuba, that were the reflections from Madam Ashine.
Thank you very much for the questions and comments, and good day. Perhaps if I start with your first comment in respect to homogenous group and treating victims of trafficking, returnees and migrants as a homogenous group. We accept the point that actually their experiences are very different. But what we were honing in on is their experiences vis-a-vis economic initiatives. So it wasn't that we were trying to, in any way, sort of ignore the other aspects of their particular journeys, but we were trying to hone in on their experiences in undertaking economic initiatives within Ethiopia. And of course, some of their experiences will impact upon that, but that's not to negate the fact that we just ignored those aspects. We just honed in on a particular area of their experience. In respect to private actors, yes, I acknowledge that many of them are based in Addis, but also there is quite a big private sector community in the SNNPR region. You will be aware of, for example, the Hawassa Industrial Park, which encourages or includes many different private actors as well. But like I said at the outset, one of the limitations of our report was that we were not able to have a very strong view from the private sector and incorporate that within our study. And I think in terms of future research, that would be a really beneficial aspect to pursue further. Thank you.
Thank you for that response. And then I think now we can take another round of questions from Sion and Julia. So please, each of you would take just 3 minutes and focus on giving some reflections that are based on what are the takeaway learning lessons that we have from the presentations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Good afternoon, all. I have to say that knowing the pain of publishing, writing, I have prepared my reflections for both authors in a way that it reflects the strength of both papers and gaps. But as now guided by the Madam Chair, I'm turning the gaps into questions to allow the authors to respond to us. So let me start with the policy brief of what you produced, Evelyn and Paul. I had the chance to read that. I have 4 questions for you. The first is, you have beautifully captured the key issues on page 3 of the policy brief at the very beginning, and I really like that because that is the way policy briefs are written. But you have missed the biggest issue in the room. Migration and health is not covered. How did you miss that? One question. The second question is, on coverage of RECs, the regional economic communities, you included a paragraph, and you directed the readers as to go to the references, the annex section. I thought that was really, insufficiently covered. Plus, noting that your paper was published in 2022, you also missed to capture the, for instance, the adoption date of the IGAD Free Movement of Persons Protocol, which was adopted in 2021, and in your paper it is captured as coming soon. So how did it happen? The other question is related to COVID.
Last question.
No, this is not last question.
Okay, so I'm assuming one question is 1 minute. So please, let's try and, keep a few questions.
COVID is not covered in your policy brief. This was written during COVID, and the African Union did excellent job. How did you miss that? And on the African Continental Free Trade Area, you have highlighted that it is one of the frameworks that will facilitate mobility of people, free movement. It is highlighted like that. Can you explain to us how does it facilitate? I'm very curious to know that. And I have a couple of questions for Mabuba. Can I do that?
Okay, maybe what we could do is allow Julia to ask questions. If they are more related to Madam Mabuba, then you can add in. But for now, they have quite some heavy questions to respond to because yours were really picking out some very, very key response that they need to provide. But Mabuba hasn't gotten any and would like to allow Julia, who also had prepared very heavily for this, to maybe, if I could ask her if your questions could be directed to Mabuba. But if you have for the team from the AUC, that's well and done, and then we can now request for additional questions. But for now, let's have your 3-minute questions.
Rachel, you're also not making it easy for us. There's a lot of tasks, 2 presentations, 3 minutes only, but let's try. So yes, so I tried to follow your directive, Rachel, and don't have so many questions directly at the researchers, but also would like to remind all of us that, of the forum where we are, bringing together researchers and also policymakers. So there's the comments go more in the direction of the methodological and the policy side of things. So looking at both presentations that we heard, I think one of the common links and also strength of these 2 research projects is the importance and the application of participatory and also the interdisciplinary research approaches, which also were used to capture, and then in the next step would also be great to really amplify the voices of beneficiaries, which is not just in the context of research is very important, but of course also in the context of policy making. Keyword being self-advocacy, participation in decision making. So I think that's something really that stood out for me from both presentations. The other one being lack of adequate data. I see that my good friend and colleague Charles Agola has left the room, but we'll have a word on that also, how that translates also to IGAD. But I'm sure you've also, it was mentioned earlier, as a good practice also for IGAD, the Regional Technical Working Group on Migration Statistics. So I think there's also a lot of linkage there. And then maybe to look at the individual presentations, I think the African, let's start with the African Union study. I think I'm also more able to speak on that one as I was part of the research team. So again, looking at this forum where we are, I think it would be a really great opportunity for the researchers to also really engage in conversation with colleagues from IGAD and also from national governments that we have here in the room. Just some keywords, I'm looking at Dr. Girum, I'm thinking cross-border surveillance, I'm looking at Dr. Kebede, I'm thinking refugee mental health, I'm looking at my friend that just left Yemi, inclusion of refugees into national health systems. So I think there's a lot of linkages there that to some extent do come out of the study, and I think Tsian also just mentioned now free movement protocol. Madame Lucy is not here today, but also the aspect of continuity of care is of critical importance when we speak about free movement. And then data, yeah, I think that was already mentioned. And then, yes, some of the other comments that Tsian also raised in terms of the timing. I mean, the study was started in 2020 as at the very beginning of the pandemic, and a lot of the things, yeah, might just have changed quite drastically. I mean, the whole pandemic was a very clear cut in all of our lives, but of course, particularly in the sense of yeah, health and migration and health. So in that sense, I know it's a big request, guys, but to consider ways to also update, validate some of the findings. There was also, I think, being in Kenya, maybe that's a good example. There was one of the findings was on the there was actually a technical working group on migrants' health, which was nested under the Ministry of Health in Kenya. Which was established in 2013. So I think you might find some interesting exchange partners in this room just to find out, is this technical working group operating? Where does it stand? So yeah, in that sense, I think that would really also boost the findings from that report. And then lastly, I think a really great example that came out of the study, as you also showed in your presentation, went through various stages, from the scoping review to the data collection to the validation. But then what I find most impressive is that you took it a step further and actually took that research to come up with the training. So I would really also love to hear a little bit more from Evelyn in that regard. And again, looking at the room where we are, how does that also relate to IGAD again? How is it going to be made accessible? I know it's a continental training, but I'm sure that might also be of interest to perhaps have some modules that might be of relevance from a regional point of view. And I'm sure you would find a lot of friends here in this room that would really like to engage in a conversation with you about that one. May I still speak to Mahbuba or no?
Okay, but
I think it was 2 minutes, Rachel, if I'm not wrong.
Okay, let's do this. Let's allow the team from AUC to respond to those questions, and then now we'll direct your last questions to Mahbuba, so that at least we are able to follow the questions and respond, so we do not miss out any of the very important reflections that you're bringing on board. So I think most of the questions are directed to the AUC team, and I think what is most interesting there is because you have a policy brief, you have a project, and also the capacity building program and so on. So there's quite a heavy aspect in terms of the study that was done, and now clearly, there's that where we need to see connecting the dots between research and policy. So I think these are we don't want to call them gaps, but we want to see them as more of the inventive, approach and solutions that are coming out of this. So maybe Evelyn and Paul take up the floor. Just respond 3 minutes again. I'm retaining a 3-minute. Rule.
Do you want me to start?
So please, 3 minutes, and then we'll have a few more, maybe 2 more questions for Mahbub, because we'd like to also have our participants on the floor to also have 3 or 4 questions, not that I'm sure they have some burning questions as well. So respond.
Merci beaucoup, Rachel. Donc, je vais insister sur les éléments contextuels, politiques de la note d'orientation, et Paul va peut-être revenir sur les aspects méthodologiques. Alors, merci déjà pour le commentaire qui nous intéresse, parce que justement, tout l'intérêt de cette note d'orientation était de renforcer le lien sur comment développer ou adresser la question de migration et de santé de façon conjointe. Et déjà, dès les premières lignes, on reconnaît l'intérêt de la question de la Covid, mais comme je l'ai dit, parce que la Commission de l'Union africaine reste dans une logique de construction structurelle à long terme, il était important pour nous de partir de l'expérience Covid ou des expériences spécifiques pour proposer des modèles structurels appliqués de façon générale par les États membres. Donc l'idée justement au niveau de la note d'orientation permettait de présenter notamment quels sont les mécanismes. OK. Quels sont les mécanismes de collecte des données des questions de santé pour les migrants? Et on présente d'excellents exemples, notamment des instruments qui ont été développés par l'OIM. On mentionne également des expériences d'États membres sur comment les besoins de santé des migrants sont adressés au niveau politique et au niveau des services offerts. L'expérience du Kenya est présentée, mais également l'expérience de l'Algérie, par exemple, dans la note d'orientation. Et pour les questions stratégiques, je vais finir en insistant sur le fait que pour la Commission de l'Union africaine, les questions de commerce et de libre-échange vont de pair avec les questions de libre circulation. Bien entendu, la dynamique sur les deux protocoles est différente actuellement, mais il est stratégiquement et politiquement difficile d'envisager que des biens, des services, des capitaux peuvent se déplacer si les individus n'ont pas la capacité d'aller suivre les investissements, d'aller recruter les personnels qu'ils veulent pour leurs petites et moyennes entreprises, et même d'autres éléments tels que, par exemple, la migration d'éducation, bien la migration de recherche. Donc pour nous, ces deux éléments sont incontestablement liés, et c'est l'occasion pour nous de rappeler aux États membres l'importance de ratifier le protocole sur la libre circulation en Afrique, ainsi que les instruments régionaux, dont notamment le protocole de l'IGAD. Merci. Paul?
Thank you,
Okay,
Evelyn,
so
and thank you. Just very briefly.
I am getting a heads up from the president of the session for the day. We need to start trying to wind up. So I've been advised.
Okay, thank you. I'll just keep my response very brief indeed. Thank you, Zion, for your comments and feedback. I think it was very interesting, and it's certainly an issue of slight concern to myself and Evelyn that in the policy brief, the link between migration and health clearly wasn't foregrounded sufficiently clearly. Also, I think some of the points you've raised are to do with the inevitable lag you have in between research and publication. So, for example, around the IGAD free movement protocol, you're absolutely right, and so that's something that needs updating. Around the African continental free trade area, whilst you're absolutely right that in and of itself it won't enable freedom of movement across the continent, it's important to understand it as part of a broader strategic direction of travel, which is about reducing barriers to the movement of people, goods and services across the continent. And with regard to COVID, within the main study report, we did include an entire section on COVID and the potential response to COVID and recommendations in that regard. However, when it came to drafting the policy brief, we felt that things had moved on quite a bit. And so, although there are references to COVID in there, maybe we should have included more. So thank you, and that's duly noted.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Evelyn. As the discussants had requested, please, we can request one question each, because that makes two questions to Mobuba. But again, distinguished participants, I think from the delegates, we also want to hear one or two questions. But again, we need to be observant of time. So we'll kindly we request your reflection to be only one from both Tion and Julia, given that this was a bigger group because there are two presentations, so we need to have a little bit more time for the discussants. But kindly, one reflection, can I call it one reflection from each of the discussants, directed to Mobuba.
Thank you, Rachel. So let me ask one critical question that comes to my mind, Mabuba, when I read your paper, which is excellently written, by the way. I really enjoyed reading it. There seems to be a discrepancy between the objective of the research because it is written to map out the different economic initiatives to offer to migrants, returnees. Then the finding, that corresponding finding to that objective, actually maps out stakeholders, not the economic initiatives. The two are completely different directions. So can you explain to us how did this happen? Because when you are presenting, I have noted you have made correction in terms of the objective of this study, but the printed version, what we have here, carries these two discrepancies. So, and I note as a researcher, such kind of mistakes happen. Always we correct them because we are human beings, but if you can explain to us how this discrepancy happens, it will be very helpful.
Thank you, Sion. Thank you. So, Julia?
Yes, thank you very much. Mahbuba, also a question. As I was reading the study, I was not quite sure if I understood correctly where the starting point of the study was, by whom it was commissioned, and also you did outline rather clearly the objectives, but then also in terms of the target group, and that I think also depending on who the target or the primary target group is, might also influence how the study is then disseminated. I know we have it here as a printout, and you said it's also available online. But if it's primarily targeting policymakers, then the question would be if, I know the study is also still relatively young, or if the plan is to come up with some sort of policy brief, or how you plan to also bring across the main findings that you have to the right people in the right format. And then, yeah, also the other question, just briefly. No, stop. Private sector perspective was not included, and that I found very surprising, actually. And you said it was not possible, so it would be great to hear what the complication here was, as it's a very important perspective, as I see it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, panelists. And now, Mabuba, you can respond. I think the questions are quite based on the methodology which you had well presented.
Respond briefly. Julia, maybe I'll start with you. Your point regarding private sector perspectives. In Ethiopia, the body that kind of represents private sector perspectives is the Chamber of Commerce, and we were unable to reach out. Well, we did reach out to them, but unable to receive their views on the topic. So that was one reason. We also found it quite difficult, given that the private sector is vast, to be able to reach out to both local private sector, international private sector. Our scope and our timing for the research did not allow for that. But like I say, that was a significant limitation, and I agree with that. In terms of the target for this particular report, it is mainly the stakeholders working in this particular area, and that's wide-ranging, and like I said, the recommendations are wide-ranging, including for government actors, but others as well, including CSOs and other organizations that are working in this particular area. So the idea is not only to inform policy, but also practice, and I think that is probably one of the main takeaways from this, because Ethiopia is quite advanced in this area on policy. There is a national migration policy that is about to come out. There are policies on employment, etc. There's the Job Creation Commission has a strategy on creating jobs, but actually the gap here is in practice. And finally, in terms of the time frame for the research, we started the research in December 2021 and concluded roughly in August, and the research was published in September. Of this year, sorry, yes, of this year. So I hope that answers your question on that. Sion, thank you for your observations about initiatives versus organizations. We viewed it as organizations providing specific economic opportunities. So within the resource booklet, you'll see that there is a list of the organizations that provide specific, as I call it, economic support or economic initiatives, and they're broken down into the different types. And like I said, it was designed as a resource, both for the beneficiaries, but also for stakeholders for adequate referral. I will leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I know it always feels rushed. It's unfortunate that a lot of the discussion is very interesting, very intriguing. There's a lot more to provide, especially most of us here researchers, so it becomes very difficult to really summarize with all the ideas, excellent ideas we have. If the President of the day will allow us to take 3 or 4 questions from the floor, then we will request the submissions to be very brief. I do not want to mention 1 minute, 2 minutes, 1 question, but kindly let's be brief. We already see our delegates who are going to be giving our closing remarks here, and we don't want to shorten their time as well. So please, we request that you're very brief, and kindly you could mention where the question is being directed to, so that the presenter can respond sufficiently. So I can see Dr. Girum. Anyone else? Anyone else, 2 or more? I know the panelists did an excellent job, but panelists, kindly let's allow the floor. They've been seated, listening very well. You've been asking excellent questions, and I'm sure maybe they have 1 or 2. Dr. Girum, anybody else? We have the lady there from, okay, from the floor. Anybody else? Those are 2 people? Okay, and 1 more person there. So we have 3 people. Then kindly let's be brief and direct your question by raising the presenter's name so that they can respond. Dr. Girum, go ahead.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you very much. First, acknowledgement for all panel. Great panel, actually, and also the discussant. Very colorful, and you made the scientific conference recommendations and points very strong. Thank you for that. So my question will be directed to the African Union Commission delegates, Paul and Madame. Merci. A very excellent presentation. You mentioned on the migration and health about the African Union Commission and REX to capacitate member states. The capacity building agenda is a very critical agenda for us. Showed how relevant REX are, and this is the African Union to have on the IGAD platform is not new, but in a very strong way. This is a very highly appreciated, and we want to know and hear from you how you are going to do this capacity building for member states together with the REX, because we have our platform. Would you like to do it direct to IGAD, or would you like to do it through member states using the platform of IGAD? So the rest of the points are mentioned by Tion. Thank you very much, and I would like to have your views on this. Thank you.
Next submission. Please say your name and the institution. Okay.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Fathi Igal, and I work primarily on issues of land conflict, which we know is both a root cause of migration and displacement and also a consequence of unmanaged migration and displacement. My question is for Evelyn and Paul. There was a brief mention in your presentation on mainstreaming policy, and I'm really interested on the theme of this year's conference being connecting research data and policy making, and also sometimes the limited data in this region on the impact of existing policies and legislations, particularly on their implementation. But how can we also change the conversation and make sure that issues of migration and displacement are also mainstreamed in bigger policies at federal and local governments, for instance, at economic development conversations, looking to resource sharing, and trying to understand some of the root causes at the sites of origin to sort of mitigate some of the issues of migration that we currently see. Thank you.
Thank you. The third submission.
Good afternoon. My name is Rosalina Mondi. I come from the Horn Institute. It's a think tank. I have questions for both presenters. And my question that I have in my mind, having been here the past 3 days, is what is motivating the researchers that you're doing? Is it that it's the investigative endeavor, so you want to find out, or is it policy that is driving the research? And how is that affecting the way the research is being conducted? I think for the sake of the research community, what's coming first? Is it to inform the policy, or is it to just be to find out? If you could address that, please.
Thank you for those really excellent questions from the floor. And I would request Mabuba to go first. I think the last question was directed to both the teams. So Mabuba would go first.
Thank you. In terms of what's motivating the research, is it policy? In a way, yes, I think part of it is to inform policy, but as I said at the outset, actually it's also to change practice. And like I say, there is a considerable amount of policy in Ethiopia in respect to migration, legislation in respect to reintegration, but the gap is in the practice. And many actors are working in this area, and I think it's really key that we change some of the practice or boost some of the positive practices that we've identified. So I would say that's the real motivating factor behind the research. Thank you.
Shukran for that response. And the team from the African Union, I think there's several questions there, so you could respond on that too. I like the teamwork there, like go fast, no, go fast, ladies first, no, first. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rachel, for giving us the floor, and I appreciate the various questions that were addressed to the African Union. I think one of the key elements we recognize in the AUC's approach is the strategic role of the RECs. And when it comes to capacity building, we have 2 different options, but usually it starts with co-designing the capacity building approaches, which would mean, for example, involving the RECs from the initial discussion in designing a product, involving them in reviewing the outcomes, and then deciding on what would be the best approach to reach out to member states, which could mean, for example, that the final product is totally handed over to the REC Secretariat for them now to roll it out, or we agree that we consider both the RECs and the member state as joint beneficiaries of any AUC's action, depending on the approach. Coming to the migration and health training course that was developed, the piloting that took place, for example, last year involved both member state and RECs, and we are discussing on what would be then the best rollout process this year, and then definitely we are going to involve our key partners on that. The point about mainstreaming policies is very important for us because, as recognized in the Migration Policy Framework for Africa, it's not necessarily optimal to redesign or design new policies every time a new subject pops up, every time there is a new constraint. But we encourage member states to identify any opportunity in developing frameworks, policies, legal instruments, strategies, to see what are the emerging issues and what are the connections with the topic that is being mentioned. Pillar 1 of the Migration Policy Framework for Africa provides policy recommendations to member states on how to target specifically migration as a core developmental topic, but also elements on cross-cutting 1.1, for example, on migration and development, highlights the need to strengthen the link between migration and any other key development issue. Migration and health, definitely, but you can also have elements in line with, for example, migration and human rights, or migration and environmental issues. So this is the way we want to approach it, and where we think guidelines to support member states will be helpful. But we also encourage this mainstreaming at the, I would say, operational, but maybe service provision level, because as one of the outcome of this study project, we are currently seeing how Africa CDC specifically can work with the regional collaborative centers, which are the regional focal points of Africa CDC, to work on specific guidelines on addressing cross-border disease surveillance, which is one of very specific and targeted element, and where we recognize the technical, professional focus of each of the organizations of the EU intervening in each of the fields. And then finally, on the motivation of the research, as we mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, it was really motivated by the AUC's mandate to advise and guide the RECs and the member states on addressing key issues. But in order to do that, we wanted to be able to understand first where the challenge is, but also what is already existing, which we can learn from, and which we can already build from, not to reinvent the wheel. So in that regard, the motivation was really about, I would say, the policy need, but also demonstrating relevance in the type of advice we are proposing to RECs and member states. Thank you. Do you want to add something?
Thank you, Evelyn. Just to add very briefly, I mean, thank you, Rosalind, as well for your question. I'd be tempted to argue it's both for those of us who are kind of real research nerds. But as Evelyn's noted, the genesis of the research project was that the African Union had identified gaps in both policy and practice in relation to migration and health. And with regard to your question around mainstreaming, I think that you might have identified an interesting point about how moves to mainstream the cross-cutting issues like migration and health at the national level maybe don't always get translated down to the local government level. Maybe that's a separate conversation. And finally, to pick up your point, Dr. Grum, about capacity building, I think the training program, I think, is an excellent direction of travel to move in, and I look forward to seeing that being rolled out for the whole continent, really, but especially in the IGAD region, but also to draw attention to the capacity building work that IGAD's already doing with its member states with regard to strengthening data collection, analysis, and sharing of migration and displacement information. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think the team here, the panel, let me join the voice in calling it a colorful panel, and really we appreciate the presentation. I know we want to continue the conversations. Clearly from the presentations made, the discussions made, there's a lot of interaction, there's a lot of more conversations that we need to have around various aspects that also has been presented. We'd like to encourage you to exchange our contacts. Let us be able to create the network, not just for that scientific conference, but also in terms of continuing. And I'd like to mention that all the documents that were presented are actually in the web app as well as the mobile app. The only thing with the mobile app, we are going to end it as of tomorrow. It was only to facilitate the conference. However, kindly, if you want to continue the conversation, it doesn't stop here, but we encourage you to continue having those very, very resourceful discussions. So I want to end here, but before we end here, and to call back the master of ceremony, our colleague by the name Lucas Drama, if I said it correctly. We have the evaluation QR code. Also, the evaluation is on the app, as well as there are forms that will be put on the tables to kindly scan and give us an evaluation. This is the last of the presentations that we have for the 3 days. We would like to hear from you. Also, we'd like to get your feedback so that even as we have further conversations, I want to call them conversations, we know what to focus on moving forward. So kindly give us your feedback, and those who are transmitting through the virtual also do so. There is going to be at the app as well as sent to your email. So I'd like to ask the panelists as they step down to have an exchange here of government with Dr. Kebede to come back and take over. But really, let's give an applause to the very colorful panel that was here, and allow for Dr. Kebede to now guide us in the next remaining session of the day. Thank you so much. Thank you. Yeah, it is a paper here. I think this is yours. Yeah. I think this is wonderful. You've been writing in yours.
Yeah, I've written on mine. Yeah, this is not mine. I think this is mine. Yeah, it is mine. Good. This is yours. I think I've written the names here. So in terms of the closing.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Rachel, for the deputy presidentship. And you have been studying the after lunch session excellently. And I was declaring that our session was an all-women session, except for one joker, Paul, for joining the high table. It is a wonderful team. And had it not been for the time, we could have heard a lot of fascinating stories from both the researchers and the panelists. Having said that, I think we are now at the point where we will be hearing from one of our guests of honor. I have told you that this conference has been serviced by the IGAD Universities Forum. Most of the members in the steering committee are from the IGAD University Forum. That's what we really want to see. We want to give opportunities to the universities, and I have been telling them to come out of their concrete jungle, their comfort zone, and then be part of the international and the regional community, contribute in their research and advise to policies and practices in the region so that we achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, we achieve the commitments that our member states make in all the international fora, plus support the dynamization of national socio-economic transformation in their own respective countries. And Professor Imadeldin Aradaib from the Vice President or the Vice Chancellor from the University of Khartoum, who is also the chair of the board of IGAD Universities Forum, will give us highlights for within 10 minutes. Professor, I have the honor and pleasure for the first time to welcome you here and to give you the platform to hear your advice on research and the role of universities in the region. You have the floor, sir.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Kabidi. And I really apologize that I missed the first day of the conference because of prior appointment at the university. But I would like to give you a talk about the relation between this conference and the IGAD University Forum. Dear honorable guest and colleague, it's a pleasure to be here with you today to attend the third IGAD Scientific Conference on Migration and Displacement. As the chair of the IGAD University Board, it is a great honor and privilege for me to welcome you all and to address this gathering in Nairobi, capital of Kenya, our neighboring country. It is also a pleasure to be with you and to meet colleagues and friends from members of states of IGAD and international bodies. It is undoubtedly that this subject, the subject of our meeting, inclusion and social cohesion, connecting research, data, and policy is one of the most important topics addressing not only the region of IGAD, but also different parts of the world as it is of global interest. The Global Compact on Refugees, GCR, affirmed on 2018, recognized the role of academics as stakeholders and actors with the forced displacement space. In addition, academics are considered at the same level as other authors, whose role is traditionally more established with respect to the refugees and forced displacement, such as international organizations, humanitarian and development actors, and local governments. Moreover, the GCR promotes the institution of global academic network to facilitate research, training, scholarship, opportunities to support objectives of the Global Compact itself. In this context, the IGAD University Forum has granted a scholarship for young staff to pursue their graduate education at the level of master and PhD degrees. About 15 of the young staff of the University of Khartoum, including teaching assistant and lecturer, are currently enrolled under the IGAD University Forum program. Some of the scholarship holders are conducting research related to the theme of this conference. Currently, there is a sharp increase in academic research on migration and displacement. However, most of the research is published by higher income countries. Therefore, the scientific paper presented in this conference will provide additional information to the existing data related to the theme of this conference. Nevertheless, the issue related to global migration and forced displacement should be studied satisfactorily to more accurately reflect the reality. IGAD Council for Higher Education, HICHE, with the university's board members, would be expected to provide an excellent opportunity of establishing community relation and furthering social awareness of the impact of migration and displacement on the IGAD region. Through scientific research, IGAD Council for Higher Research could also serve as the right place for people-to-people interaction involving research, collaboration, and improvement of socio-economic status of our communities. I would suggest that this gathering can play the initial role in establishing a science-society policy dialogue in order to, first, to serve and deliver platform for scientific dialogue and bringing decision policymaker, academic, civil societies, and related stakeholders together for collaborative dialogue on migration and displacement in the context of inclusion and social cohesion, and also to conduct and present scientific solutions for filling the policy implementation gaps based on connecting research and policy to inform the decision makers. To fulfill the objective, it would be necessary to develop a strong link and establish network between IGAD University Board to work in the area of migration and displacement in the region. In addition, there is a need for strengthening the relationship between the IGAD University Board and academic institution and the policy makers. Initiatives such as United Nations Higher Commission for Refugees and Global Academic Interdisciplinary Network are examples of interaction between academics, and socio-political actors that can consider as a lesson learned. The UNHRC should foster collaboration across different institutions in the IGAD region. It should be noted that the reinforce the collaborative efforts between IGAD, universities, and the international institutions can lead to concrete results in terms of better policies. Once again, I'm glad to report that we have the interest and desire to work together with our colleagues and friends from members of the IGAD University Board to establish Regional Center of Excellence for climate change, migration, and displacement. The University of Khartoum will be honored to host one of these centers of excellence. I believe that the expected outcome from this scientific conference will be achieved on ground and hopefully will join effort to continue engaging all of us to find scientific solution on migration and displacement in the IGAD region. Last but not least, I would like to take advantage of this opportunity to express my sincere thanks and appreciation to the scientific and steering committees of this conference who made this event a reality. I would also like to extend my thanks and all appreciation for their appreciation for all participants for their impressive and fruitful presentation. As we are approaching the end of our conference, it seems that the conference is so far very successful, or it is really very successful. I wish that practical recommendation will follow. Thank you for your attention. Okay.
Thank you, Prof. Professor will be my other boss as chair of the IGAD Universities Forum. And we are very happy to have him. He is very much keen to strengthen collaboration and partnership between IGAD and the universities and between IGAD and our partner institutions through the academic production, both in terms of graduates and also the research products that we continue to generate throughout the region in addressing the challenges that our region is facing in all areas, including climate change, migration, displacement, conflict, and those economic difficulties that we are facing. So, Prof, you are most welcome. And I would like to assure you that the board will have significant role in the forthcoming research deliberations and discussions. Having said that, I think we are now coming closer to the end of day 2, on day 3, the day of my authority. And I'd like to throw a few points regarding this session, the whole of the sessions, and then also the next one. We have raised issues related to 2 types of recommendations from this conference. Recommendation 1 is a 1 or 2 pager to inform our higher level policymakers. They don't have time to go through all the report, but we have to produce very key takeaways that would be relevant for immediate decision making. So we would charge our rapporteurs to capture the highlights that have been made, especially those that are relevant for IGAD in terms of the course of action for the next year and after. So I think that will help us organize the next edition of the conference very effectively, participatorily, and also addressing those issues raised here but that have not been answered. And that's recommendation type 1. Recommendation type 2 is the summary of the deliberations that have been made both in the plenary and then also in the breakout session. So I think we take those notes and highlights that have arisen from the deliberations through the presentations that have been made by the researchers. They will be part of the proceedings, and then we will use those points also as guide for future research. And in this case, we would like to appeal to Austria, which is our rapporteur, to do all it can to summarize and then provide these highlights to IGAD. With regard to the papers that are presented, we would like to request the authors, those that are presented and those that are not presented, but whose papers are potential candidates for publications, to review, incorporate the feedbacks and the issues raised by the panelists and also the audience throughout the last 3 days, and then send them back to us so that we would again refine, design, and format, and then publish that either in terms of a book. As I said yesterday, some of them will be published in the form of a book, academic book, and then some of them will be published in the form of proceedings of this conference. And in this case, I would like to request the authors to be very vigilant, very active, and also time sensitive when you receive messages to send feedbacks as soon as you can. Time is very important. And I think, having said that, I would like to express sincere appreciation to everyone here and those that attend this conference virtually. Most importantly, I would like to extend our heartfelt appreciations to all of you who have been here for the last 3 days, who have made time available for this very important undertaking, and who have been patiently and very actively and also proactively interacting and contributing to the shaping up of the outcomes of this conference. We thank you very much. We continue to work together, to collaborate, and then to contribute to the academic and practical solutions of the region and the problems it faces. A few institutions and individuals I would like to express gratitude. This hotel is very comfortable. The president yesterday was here for a week, and then he has assured us that it would be good. It was good. So we appreciate the hotel for their excellent service and also the hospitality. Continue to do so, so that we may come again, inshallah. The event organizers, you have seen this excellent organization, excellent facilitation, everything plenty and in time with us. So we thank you very much for making our work easier. Continue to work better and efficiently so that the next events would be more successful than even this one. You have heard language spoken in this region, very many, most notably Arabic and French. There are interpreters around us who we don't see, but we hear. And I think they deserve our appreciation. So they facilitated our work, they made it easier, and then we communicate. So thank you very much. And then you see those beautiful designs with lots of meaning, also artistic appeal, have been done by graphic designers. I was told the graphic designer is Nizilani. Correct me, Rachel, if I have said it correctly. We thank you very much for beautifying and also making things visible through your excellent artistic work. We have tireless rapporteurs and our colleagues from Austria. Austria, you know, is one of the most prolific academic producer, supporters of research, and we are very familiar with what they do. We really commend them for the good work they are doing in terms of recording the proceedings of this conference and also what they do in their respective domain in promoting scientific research, especially in the social sciences discipline within the region. And then we will actually have a very concrete outcome when we go into the next year of the conference. We have a number of partners here, and as all of you know, IGAD is small, has very limited capacity, but it is participatory. It actually decentralizes its work, gives responsibility to partners. And the partners, when you give them responsibility, they play that role very beautifully, successfully. We thank UNHCR, we thank IOM, we thank the bilateral partners, the governments that work with us, in particular the government of Germany that is putting a lot of money for the implementation of most of our programs. We thank the governments of Sweden, the governments of Switzerland, the governments of Finland, the governments of all the partner countries. We thank you very much for being with us. And one thing you have learned, and we have learned, is that we have not failed you, we cannot fail you, we will not fail you. We have produced, we will be producing, and then we will show results. With the limited capacity that we have, we are very much determined, we do the things from the bottom of our heart, we register results. We will be showing more results in the years to come. Be with us, and then let's serve the region. And it is a give and take process. So we are very proud of our partnership. We will continue to demonstrate excellence in all what we do. But I would not be fair to this conference if I didn't mention the host country for the traditional warm hospitality, for the very generous services that we have received. All this that we actually mentioned comes from the goodwill of the government. And very luckily, as Madam Fatia yesterday mentioned, we have a new government, and we are very proud that democracy is taking roots here, and we are learning a lot from here, and we want to demonstrate that Kenya is for Africa, for East Africa, for IGAD. We thank you very much for hosting us. We thank you very much for, yes. Thank you so much, and we thank you very much for teaching us. And we are good students in the region, so we'll do what we can. Finally, I think I was denying time for other panelists. Nobody is now denying because I am the president. But time is of the essence, and now it has to come to an end. And the end is coronated by the closing remarks. And I'm very happy my colleague and director Fatia Alwan is with us now. I think it is time to call the people that will bless us and send us off and with their closing remarks. So I'd like to call upon first Mr. Simon Longoli, Karamoja Development Forum. I was told he is also a researcher himself. Mr. Simon would like to have you here to give us a few remarks on the closing. Mr. Simon Longoli. Yes, you are from there. Most welcome. Thank you, Director. I'm advised that all the speakers come here, so I'll call the closing remark speakers. I have a colleague from COMESA, Mr. Mohammed. Mr. Mohammed, kindly join us on the floor. My friend and colleague, Mr. Tajeddin from the International University of Africa, our close partner. You have the floor here to give us closing remarks. Madam Kobe Haile Gabriel, on behalf of IGAD, to say a few words. Madam Fatia Alwan, on behalf of the Executive Secretary and also as the Director, you have the floor here. And the Commissioner Kafi Mwanda, Your Excellency, Commissioner for Refugee Affairs of Ministry of Interior of Kenya, would like you to be here. If we have this. Thank you, Excellency. So as I said, we'll start with Mr. Simon. I think we can make it as you see it. So we can, you can speak from where you are, if you wish. They come here? Okay, come here.
Thank you, Dr. Kebede, and very well done for standing for 3 days. Ms. Fadia Alwan, the IGAD Health and Social Development Director, standing in for the Executive Secretary, IGAD member states, UN agencies, researchers, all delegates. Good evening. My name is Longoli Simon Peter. I'm a researcher and executive director at the Karamoja Development Forum, or KDF, based in Moroto, Uganda. We are a research and advocacy civil society organization and working with pastoralists in the Karamoja cluster on the interface of land and natural resources, conflict, food security, and governance. We aim to share context-based learning and knowledge with development practitioners while strengthening local capacities to deal with development challenges of pastoralists. As a member of civil society, it's been an enriching experience to attend and participate at this third IGAD Scientific Conference on Migration. I go with a lot of lessons, especially on how to leverage new knowledge in dealing with the challenges that we face in the region. IGAD remains a very key player in the development of our region, and with its massive convening power, it's well positioned to help all players tap into their potential and true to a core theme of this conference, achieve inclusion and social cohesion. In Karamoja cluster, which is on the borderlands of Uganda, Kenya, South Sudan, and Ethiopia, we have benefited from an increased collaboration between actors, anchored in a significant way on the role of the IGAD Cross-Border Development Facilitation Unit. It's important that these efforts are scaled up, and that, for example, we see a stronger participation of community-level organizations in the next regional events, such as the next conference on migration and displacement. But since I'm an activist, I would like to leave you with what I think could improve in a future conference. A lot of feedback has been shared already on method and the quality of research. But as a pastoralist and a leader of a pastoralist organization, I think we could re-emphasize the position of pastoralism and of its critical role in either ensuring inclusion and cohesion or not. Our region, and this is from IGAD's own research, is home to 250 million, 80% of whom are livestock keepers, while 55% of the same are keeping livestock under nomadic or semi-nomadic modes. I would like to leave this conference with a question. Of the IGAD's 4.5 million refugees and asylum seekers, it's 12.7 million internally displaced persons. How many are in their status because of the crisis that pastoralism faces? And would solving this problem involve actions to fix crisis in pastoralism? My thesis is this is the case. If you are looking to solve IGAD's migration and displacement problems, kindly look to pastoralism. Future research could focus on answering these questions. Pastoralists already show us that migration, euphemistically referred to as mobility, is part of life and a factor of production. Our relative hospitality to migrants in our region may essentially be because we are mostly pastoralists, and our livelihood thrives on the sharing of resources. Because, as Nick Karimojong, who are my people, say, we are carrying the sun always on our backs. I leave this conference enriched and looking to an enhanced role of civil society organizations and local communities who are the true owners of all the knowledge we have shared here in the last 3 days in the next scientific conference on migration and displacement. In Karimojong, we say Alakara. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Simon, for your wonderful closing remarks. I now call upon our colleague from COMESA to give us his remarks.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thanks to other presidents who chaired the last 3 days. It's a very democratic meeting. I like it. And IGAD and IGAD member states, institutions, research institutions, universities, development partners, authors of the research papers, other distinguished delegates who came to this great third IGAD conference on migration and displacement. Good evening, Assalamu alaikum. And all protocols are observed. I would like to thank IGAD for organizing this meeting and as well as inviting us in order to get potential knowledge for migration. Really, it was more beyond than what we have used to know about the migration. I would like also to acknowledge and appreciate the excellent efforts going in IGAD region in order to address the socio-economic and issues related with the migration in the region. As we know, migrant workers contribute significantly to the socio-economic development of both countries of origin and the country of destination in our regions or in general in our continent, Africa. The way they contribute to the development, sending of remittance to their home, share, transfer of knowledge, participate of every kind of economic activities in their country. As we know, the main reason for people to migrate is the lack of socioeconomic opportunities, such as employment, security issues, natural disaster, and among other factors pertaining to economic and socially. The latest result disseminated in this region about the migration, the international migrant population in IGAD is 6.5 million, whereby 4.5 of them are working age, and as well as 3.4 million of them are migrant workers. So this migrant population, they need to have an access to social services such as health, education, and other social issues. And as well as they need to have a legal documents that give us a legal status in their countries. So the most challenges, migrants, they face challenges, including language barrier, legal status, and some other reasons. So we need to address these challenges. So the latest, the most, in my conclusion, I don't like to prolong my speech. I would like to encourage to the member states to improve, especially the statistical offices, to disseminate up-to-date migration statistics of high quality for use in the development of policies so as to adequately address effects of migration on women and men in the region. As you know, COMESA and IGAD, they share member status, except South Sudan, other members of IGAD, as well as they are member in COMESA. So the efforts and the development goals in IGAD, it adds value to our region. So thank you, all of you, for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Mohamed, for your brilliant closing remarks. Now I give the floor to my dear sister, Madam Kokobe Haile Gabriel, to speak on behalf of IGAD.
Thank you, Dr. Kabada. Good afternoon, everyone. Distinguished delegates from IGAD member states and representatives from academia, civil society, IGAD Secretariat, African Union Commission, Regional Economic Community here. So I see a very diverse room here, and I think that is one of the very good things of this conference. We're back to the conference venue, correct me, Dr. Elduma, but we were here for the first conference, on scientific conference in Radisson Upper Hill in Nairobi, and we're back here. So next time I hope we'll also diversify in regards to location. But I must say, these past 3 days, you can really see that IGAD Secretariat has really tried to engage various sectors, and not only from the researchers, of course, but also from civil society, academia, etc., from other sources. And I think that is very commendable. And also from the setup, we've had a dance, songs, we have an application. I see changes and also developments in regards on how to create a very good ecosystem for exchange. And I see also that the important part is also the parts in between, being the breaks. And I feel giving the opportunity to researchers to connect with the policymakers, but also others that they might not have access to is quite unique. And I think it's very important, and I commend IGAD Secretariat for providing this platform. And I hope also that it will continue and that we can sustain what networks have been created, or you all who have created, and I hope talked and connected and exchanged contacts. Myself, I have really gotten to know very, very interesting new people, so I think that is something that we need to take forward. This is off of everything else. I think the in-betweens sometimes you tend to be ignored, but I think those are the very, very important parts. So a wide range of topics have been discussed. We know that migration and displacement are very complex topics, but we also know that we need to know more, and I think also the thinking on having research stemming from the region. And it has been raised a couple of times throughout the conference that we are still not there. We are still not there in a sense that even when Somalia
there was mentioning it today, there was also an issue of having submissions. So I think we really need to build on this and increase this, and I hope that one day we'll have many, many, many highly qualitative researches on migration and displacement, and we're flooding the market internationally with the knowledge that is produced in the IGAD region. That would be very beautiful. But I think this is the way to go, and this is also what is being done. The other things, of course, once we have this knowledge, what do we do with it? We really need the exchange and maybe even more space to reflect with policymakers on how they need the research to be channeled to them, how they can really use the information gathered. Sometimes, of course, knowledge is one thing, but also language. Sometimes it's very theoretical, and even if it's theoretical, you can still get an essence of actionable knowledge that you gain from something. And the beauty about research is that somebody said it also in one of the sessions, it doesn't have an agenda, it's open. We all have agendas, interests and things. So I think what research gives us is an opportunity to open our heads and look at things from a completely maybe unexpected angle, but then now what do you do with that angle and how do you get it into action? I think this is now where we, as we go forward also with the next scientific conferences, will find tools, ways to make sure that it's maybe policy briefs, but maybe it's also something completely different that we haven't thought about. So I would, again, like to thank IGAD Secretariat for being consistent in convening this, for also widening the scope and also the participation. I think it's really key. We are online streamed, even the breakout rooms were streamed. This is the first time, even during COVID, we didn't manage to do that. So this is a very, so you can see that it really reaches more people than are even here in the room. So I want to commend IGAD Secretariat. We know that the steering committee met, I think, thrice to really work on the research papers and so on. So the steering committee has really worked very hard to get to the research papers, and I think also the organizing team of IGAD are going to be happy to be able to sleep after this, because they've been working very hard, and I want to thank them. Specifically, of course, I think Rachel Mbaria was running around here all the time, and you know that she was also very, very much, yes. So I hope that she'll be able to relax after this, but I think the number of people that were engaged in this, in the preparation of this meeting is very large. So I don't really want to talk long. I just really, I'm happy. I found it to be a very good conference, and I think the most important is what do we do with it. I hope we'll have a publication, and I also hope that the researchers that are yet to improve on their work, etc., will also do so and keep the conversation going so that we have really good papers at the end of the day. And I want to thank everyone that was here, and I also want to thank again Madame Fatia for her leadership in the migration program, to also keep everybody on their toes. Yes, thank you very much. So much for my hand.
Thank you, Coco, for those remarks and appreciation to the IGAD team. I actually would like to join you to thank my colleagues who have been working days and nights. You mentioned Rachel, the owner of this program, and you have the presidents, Dr. Fatuma, the first day, Dr. Groom, the second day, not mentioning this one, and all the other colleagues, I think, Yulia, Ogola, and also the steering committee who have done immense work on making this truly scientific. We thank you very much for the labor that you have put. I would like now to give the floor to Mr. Tajuddin Niam from the International University of Africa in Khartoum.
Your Excellencies, all participants, allow me to recognize the presence of Madame Fathia as an acting executive director. Also recognize the presence of Commissioner Ali Atoun, our chairman, who opened this meeting, the presence of our president, board of IGAD universities, the participants, and the partners, because their partners make this event available. So let me thank the partners for their contribution. The hosting country, which is Kenya, and the organizers, IGAD team, especially those who present, the presenters of the 3 days. I don't want to call them presidents. In Africa, president is a problem. But those who are really chair a meeting, very good. And all the participants, because everybody has contributed to this event, and we are all participants. I just want to, based on 3 points. Point number 1, we want the outcome of this beautiful and very good forum go to the participants and find a way to be implemented, because the result of this meeting and this forum, which is a scientific one, is not being implemented, adopted by the decision makers, and the policy makers is not going to be useless. So hopefully, this will find a way, and we need to form a committee to follow up this one. The second point, Professor Hunud Abiy Kodov, the Vice Chancellor of International University of Africa, was very willing to come. International University of Africa is hosting students from 86 countries, including Sudan. We receive students from 49 African states. 6,000 of them are dormitories. We give them 3 meals, education, health until they are graduated. I think you remember, he asked me actually to remind again and to recommit that IUA is ready to provide 150 new chances for IGAD for this year. Refugees, displaced, as well as hosting community students. And I have to recommend the effort exerted by the Office of Education, Brother, I don't want Dr. Kabadi. Already we started admitting students. We admitted almost 15 students from different IGAD region, mainly from different faculties, whether medicine or we have 22 faculties. So this new offer is going to IGAD, and will continue to contribute. And it is a chance to appeal to all universities to contribute. Because without education, all what we are saying is not going to be implemented. And because I have the privilege of visiting Kakuma, as well as Dadaab, I have seen how much those students are willing to come. Because their future depends on this education, especially the refugees. To be a refugee means you don't know where your father is maybe, you don't know your mother is, your relatives, your family. So the only hope that you can make you live is education. And so I appeal to all universities to do this. As our Vice Chancellor is here from Khartoum University, he's a new Vice Chancellor, we have to reactivate the IGAD Board Forum. Last time we proposed to have the second meeting in Juba, in South Sudan, our brother in South Sudan. You know, we feel we're one country with 2 governments. Huh? With Sudan, we feel that the South Sudan is still, we are part of the South Sudan. So the coming forum will take place in Juba. And the time has been passed already. We could not make it because due to the political situation in Sudan. Now, and there was transitional for the Vice Chancellor, of Khartoum, who is the chairman also of the board. I again appeal to the Vice Chancellor, to IGAD, to make that event in Juba available. The second thing also, we agree that we are going to create center of excellences from the different universities. And to do that, we agreed to form a committee to put a criteria, visit the universities, and to decide 6 or 7 center of excellency for the university so that we can go forward. I again remind those people this. Having said this, I want to thank you all for this very important conference. IGAD for their vigorous efforts have been exerted and prepared, partners, the hosting country, and hopefully we'll continue to exert our efforts for the welfare of the region. And let us put in mind that we are very close to have one united region and one united Africa. Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Niam, and we recognize the contributions of the International University of Africa. As you said, we were to be joined by His Excellency Professor Hunud Abia. Unfortunately, he was unable to come due to ill health. We wish him well. He is currently in Germany. Universities, you have heard what the IUA is doing for IGAD. You have heard. Who has not heard from the universities? Scholarship for IGAD, refugees, the returnees, and host communities. They gave us 200 last year, and we are still working on that. We are starting little by little, but we are coming to the other universities. And I want you to pledge and to take students, because as he put it rightly, without education, there is no action. And so we thank you very much for that. Now I have the honor to invite my boss, my colleague, Madam Fatia Alouan, to give us her opening remarks, closing remarks. Oh, you know, as a president, I don't want to end this day.
A good afternoon, bon après-midi, and again, assalamu alaikum to all of you. I'm here, yes, Dr. Kabadi, to close, not to open. A distinguished representative from our member state, the researchers, academicians, our donors, the colleagues, but also our hosting country, Kenya. I would like to thank all of you on behalf of His Excellency Dr. Werkene Gebeyehu, but also on behalf of IGAD. I think now that we have completed and also we have come to the end of our intensive gathering, I think the 3 days workshop has been a very successful meeting. I will not take much because I know all of us now have been exhausted, but just I'll take a few points. Actually, how we'll be moving as a way forward from the recommendation that has been emanating from this meeting. I think for IGAD, it's very important because always what you have say is our organization, of course, is a political organizations, but also always what we're missing is that we don't have the arm of the organs which is involved in the researchers, academic, and now we're very happy that this forum has been very engaged and intensive for the last 4 years, and this is why today we're also happy just conclude the 3rd scientific conference on migration and displacement. Dear participants, just allow me to highlight few recommendations and way forward from this meeting. I think we all know that we have received 34 researchers who've submitted their paper for this conference, including also those who didn't make a presentation. So what we'll do, that will be allowing them time to incorporate the feedback and also the comments from the conference with the support of Austria to guarantee the highest quality papers. So once this is done, IGAD also together with the steering committee will convene a follow-up meeting that will chart the path also to ensure that the papers are published. Second also, given that the operational nature of our work will also tease out that the relevant recommendation will reach out our member state to see also how they could be taken up and implemented the soonest. The third is that also in the planning of future conference, we will strive also to promote the participation of more researchers from all IGAD member state. And we're also listening that like some countries like Somalia, South Sudan, Djibouti, I think it's very important all our member states are involved and submitted their papers. And also, we'd like also to widen, also to include, we have also some important think tank in our region. I think also it's very important that we involve them in this initiative. I would like also to thank Madame Rachel, who has been actually coordinating this international conference, and also with the member of the steering committee. I would like really to thank all of them especially. Last, but also not least, I would like also to promote, as we were listening this morning from some delegate, the inclusion of the person with disability, and also include also a specific section on people with disability in the agenda of the next conference. What I can say is that disability, people with disability also is an area where IGAD, we are working in line with the African Union, and also are in process also even formulating a regional policy strategy in line with the policy of a mother organization. Last also, I would like to thank the International University of Africa. I think really this has been a big achievement of milestone. And we have taken note of the 115 scholarship for our citizens, the most neglected or vulnerable populations. And also we hope that the next time or the years coming, that we're having more. I know that University of Africa in Sudan, we have almost 200, but 115 for this year. I think around also 100 scholarship has been granted from the Uganda International University. We are also in discussion also with the Turkish government, who will be providing scholarship to IGAD. And all this actually, we want for the people who have the most neglected, who have no voice, to give also a chance to have also educations. I would like to thank, I will not take much, but thank you sincerely on behalf of IGAD. I would like also to thank our partners, GIZ, my sister Kokube, and I think IOM, a very important partner in this migration. UNHCR, the colleagues in the displacement. I think we're working really hand to hand with all these people, but thank you so much, and we'll see you next year. Thank you. Merci.
Thank you, Madam Fatia, for the pre-closing statement. And we are almost now there. I have now the honor and the privilege to invite the Government of Kenya representative from the Ministry of Interior, His Excellency Mr. Kati Mwanza. I would have loved this to go on, but you close it, sir.
Thank you very much, the President of the conference. And thank you very much for your earlier compliments to the people of Kenya following the recently held elections. Yes, indeed, we are in the process of forming a new government, the fifth administration in Kenya. Let me also take this opportunity to recognize the presence of the team from IGAD Secretariat led by Madam Fatia and the other team members of that, the different organizations here, the member states represented here in the conference from day one on the 1st to date, I also recognize the other partners to the member states and also the partners to IGAD, the very able researchers and the ladies and gentlemen from the academia. Good morning. Is it still morning or it's afternoon? Good afternoon. Thank you very much for these fruitful discussions. I want to take this opportunity also to congratulate the IGAD Secretariat for being very ably involved in organization of very successful conferences in this region. And the commitment of the IGAD Secretariat is unmatched. I have seen a lot of commitment. During my few months as the Commissioner for Refugees in Kenya, I've seen IGAD organize a lot of meetings in the last few months, and I'm very, very impressed with that performance. I also want to thank the member states for the commitment. None of the member states misses the meetings whenever organized by IGAD. And at the same time, I also want to thank the other partners, the development partners, those who support different programs and the conferences. I also want to take this opportunity to thank them for ensuring that we have very well organized and fruitful conferences. And at least the ones I've attended in Kenya have been very, very fruitful. And I also got feedback from the teams I sent to other conferences in both Uganda and Ethiopia and Djibouti. Highly successful conferences. Thank you very much indeed, the team from IGAD Secretariat. At the same time, let me also take this opportunity to thank the team that you have put together to undertake different researches on different areas. They have done a wonderful job, and I think the 3-day discussions, presentations and discussions were highly successful, although I believe they still required more time because of the in-depth researches that have come up from the academia. They needed a little bit more time perhaps to share that, but suffice it to say that we have adequate information. The rest of the information will be able to go through and read and be able to implement as appropriate. And at the same time also use the information gained from this conference to enable us as a region to make better decisions in management of migrants and displaced persons. I would like also to take this opportunity to urge the members of the region to continue being committed to provide solutions to migrants and displaced people, to ensure that the programs we make provide opportunities as, to provide the migrants with basic rights and access to social services, equal opportunities, as well as protecting them in the region. I therefore believe that from these conference discussions, the member states will find time to go through what has been discussed. They will also formulate decisions, or rather make decisions, formulate policies and strategies that will enable better management of migration and displacement in the region. And I am sure as members, we all know that in this region, migration and displacement are very common and constantly happening every other time. There seems to be no near future, foreseeable future, when we will have no such. I don't know why we seem to have quite a number of challenges, but from these researches and from the information shared by the researchers, I am sure we will be able to formulate policies and strategies as member states that will address the causes, the root causes of particularly displacements, so that we can have a bit of stability in the region. So as we come to the end of these presentations and discussions, there's need to focus on the next steps towards making better policies that will provide durable solutions to the challenges faced by migrants and displaced persons. It is also expected that member states will create the right environment for engagement with researchers so that there is continuous sharing of information that will inform decision-making, policy formulation, strategies, as well as the implementation parts. It is always very, very necessary that we have follow-up meetings and we have follow-up forums. Member states should be able to create deliberately forums to engage with researchers. Sometimes there is that missed link between the two. Researches are done, they are presented here, and perhaps that forms the end of it. The rest of it, we put in the shelves. I don't know whether we still have shelves in this era of technology, but they are put in the shelves, and we'll look for it when things are very thick or things have already gone wrong. So I believe that member states should deliberately have some forums with the researchers, the academia, and other stakeholders in this forum so that we continuously review our policies to suit the emerging circumstances and the emerging issues in the region. So I urge my fellow member states and governments to be able to ensure that they do engagement with the researchers so that the decisions we make are based on firm foundation of research. At the same time, there's always the need to have timely implementation of policies. Timeliness in that if we acted at the right time, perhaps the challenges faced in migration and displaced community and the displacement, the time taken, the damage would be minimized if we acted in a timely manner. So there has to be continuous commitment towards addressing challenges in a timely manner. Any time lost, a lot of people suffer in the process. And some suffering cannot be mitigated. Whatever they go through is not easily mitigated. So it is always important that decisions and policies are implemented in a timely manner. As we live here, let us therefore live with that kind of commitment that whatever has come out of the conference, the agreed way forward. And the president, it was not the president, one of the speakers mentioned that there was a summary of recommendations to be made on the way forward for the decision makers and a summary of the deliberations. Once they are shared, I believe it is a very good opportunity for the states to be able to start implementation with the partners within each individual member state and also collectively. So, ladies and gentlemen, let me also take this opportunity to once more thank the IGAD and its partners who have, for ensuring that this conference took place, and also thank the researchers and the scholars and other delegates who have participated in this very, very important conference. And it is supposed to ensure that we shape the future of our people within the region. As I had already mentioned earlier, the responsibility of all of us as we are here and our partners out there to ensure that we address those challenges with a lot of commitment, with a lot of dedication, and putting all the available resources towards that. So, ladies and gentlemen, let me take this opportunity to wish you safe journeys home as you go back to the countries. And we hope to continue with the engagements, not only in conferences like this, but I am sure we have all shared contacts which can enhance communication between ourselves. And we need to continue with those communications amongst ourselves as stakeholders so that we are able to address challenges. Do not sit alone wherever you may be and say, I have a huge challenge here which I cannot surmount. When a brother next door, when a sister next door can provide some guidance and further support to yourselves. So let's remain united and committed towards providing solutions. Please pass our sincere appreciation to all the member states, the other organizations, and convey our greetings back home once you get there. And feel most welcome once more to come for more conferences to Kenya. We are always ready to host you. And we are also ready to visit and also come for conferences in your countries in the spirit of unity in the region. Thank you very much.
Even the mic refuses to speak out. Excellency, thank you very much. We take note of your support. We take note of also your expression of solidarity. And then also, I think, even visiting other countries, holding the subsequent meetings in other member states so that by so doing, we circulate the fraternity, the friendship, and the hospitality. So IGAD is doing that. We will continue to do that. And next time, maybe the next conference could be, why not in Juba, or why not in Djibouti, why not in Mogadishu, inshallah. So we will do everything. And we are coming at the end of this month, Excellency, we are coming here again. When I am a young man after this one, and then we have a ministerial conference on youth next month, no, this month, end of the month, we'll come back here and then we'll see you once more. Thank you very much. Having said that, I think we have now done the formal closing. Rachel, if you have some housekeeping announcement or any send-off with tears, you have the floor. And I would like the hall to join me in responding to the appreciation that the High Table has given us. Can you? Yes.
I just want to stand up and thank everybody. I have nothing more to add. I think this has been very, very appreciative, especially for those who took the time virtually or to be here physically. Thank you so much to everybody, and we look forward to continuing having our conversation, keep in touch, and also we encourage our researchers to kindly, as the director has said, let us make this a successful conference by having publications that comes from the region that is going to be shared internationally. Thank you all, travel well, and looking forward to seeing you again. Bye.